invented yet. But anything between my feet and the ground, I don't do very well. So I'd rather have my feet solid on the ground. Brothers and sisters, first of all, I am grateful for the invitation to take part in this forum, and my particular thanks go to Radek and to Brother Cruz. Where are you, Brother Cruz? Oh, there you are. For their invaluable assistance in the preparation of these remarks. Human trafficking is an open wound on the body of contemporary society, a scourge upon the body of Christ. It is a crime against humanity. The very fact of our being here to combine our efforts means that we want our strategies and areas of expertise to be accompanied and reinforced by the mercy of the gospel, by closeness to the men and women who are victims of this crime. These are the words that Pope Francis uttered on the 10th of April in 2014 when he joined delegates from all parts of the world gathered in Rome for a conference on combating human trafficking. Without equivocation, but with the boldness of proclamation that he frequently calls parousia, Pope Francis made the fight against this abhorrent plague, this form of modern slavery, a priority of his pontificate. With simplicity but directness, he referred to human trafficking more recently for what it is. It is ugly, it is cruel, it is criminal. Human trafficking is one of the worst manifestations of greed, selfishness, and lust, which prompts individuals to objectify their fellow human beings. The victims of this crime come from every race, tribe, and religion, and pay a very high price for the sins of others. Slavery might have been challenged in the past and made illegal, first at the international level, then in individual countries, but the idea of enslaving and using others has returned in the form of human trafficking in our late modern society. Human trafficking can be considered to be among the adverse consequences of globalization. Indeed, the opening of international boundaries, the intermeshing of cultures, as well as the dominance of the current economic model, has made our globalized century society an unforeseen yet convenient hunting ground for human traffickers. Since the 1990s, however, we begin to hear stories of individuals, then of whole groups, who mysteriously disappeared while traveling away from their countries in search of jobs. Women were ending up in brothels, men in exploitative mines, factories, and farms. They were coming from different faiths, cultures, and traditions, but they were bound by the same trauma, that is, human exploitation. As of this year, the International Labor Organization estimates that 21 million people throughout the world are currently victims of forced labor, including victims of human trafficking, especially for labor and sexual exploitation, as well as for the sale of human organs. The situation is quite difficult to ignore, and yet, in all likelihood, forms of human trafficking are happening before our very eyes, and we are just unaware that they are taking place. When true followers of Christ hear the stories of the abuses that victims of human trafficking suffer, they cannot simply pass by as the Levite or the priest in the parable of the Good Samaritan. The following is an account of the experience of one of the victims. Quote, "Once we landed in the destination country, we were taken to an unknown place. I did not understand what was happening, as I was to be working in a hotel. But the place where the trafficker kept us was nothing like a hotel. In fact, it was more like a filthy den. Soon we were told that the cost of organizing our stay was 15,000 euros, that we needed to start working as prostitutes in order to pay back our debt. We protested, tried to run away, and cried for help, but no one responded. Instead, we were beaten, denied food, tortured, and raped. Some of us who continued to resist were given narcotics. We used to sleep with many men, both old and young, performing with them different types of sexual acts. Our owners used to force us to be ready 24 hours a day. If one of us got pregnant, they forced her to have an abortion. Once you got sick or could not perform, you were sold to another brothel or simply thrown out on the street, the same way someone throws out an old rug. It is because of testimony such as this that the Holy Father rightfully calls human trafficking modern slavery, the slavery of our time. In a world where most followers of Christ are either unaware of the appalling situation or worse, freely choose to ignore its existence, human trafficking has indeed become the crime that chains us all. It has taken the global community nearly a decade to understand the intensity, danger, and impact of human trafficking on the entire human race in general and on individual societies in particular. When in the year 2000 countries from around the world came together in Palermo, Italy, and signed a special protocol that made human trafficking a criminal endeavor, there was a ray of hope that the joint effort of member states would start its eradication. After all, human trafficking is undoubtedly criminal behavior. And there was a ray of hope that the joint effort of member states human trafficking is undoubtedly criminal conduct that police throughout the world, it was believed, would be able to tackle without difficulty. Unfortunately, with the passage of time, people slowly realized that this was not to be the case. Passing an international law, having it ratified by states, and publicly acknowledging that human trafficking is a crime was a good step, but it was only a first step. Sadly, the lack of appropriate training for law enforcement agencies to cope with the problem, as well as the indifference of some nation states and powerful lobbies regarding the issue, made the ratification process of the Palermo Protocol irrelevant. Consequently, there was, and still is, no end in sight for this global crime. The failure of the Palermo Protocol, nonetheless, motivated individuals from various countries, including coalitions of faith-based organizations, to put themselves at the forefront of an alliance against human trafficking. These women and men realized that the criminalization of human trafficking must be accompanied by robust activism, awareness campaigns, lobbying, and support for government law enforcement agencies. It would be good for us to see this current global problem in the light of a historical crime that elicits in us, especially those from Africa, a strong reaction. As we all know, slavery was part of human history, long before the birth of Christ. In yesterday's Office of Readings in the Liturgy of the Hours, we read this text from St. Paul's first letter to Timothy. All slaves under the yoke must have unqualified respect for their masters, so that the name of God and our teaching are not brought into disrepute. Slaves whose masters are believers are not to think any the less of them because they are brothers. On the contrary, they should serve them all the better, since those who have the benefit of their services are believers and dear to God. Indeed, during the age of antiquity and into the Middle Ages, slavery was an accepted institution in virtually every human society. It was only in the late 18th century that slavery began to be questioned. Lawyers, philosophers, politicians started to clamor for an end to this shameful practice. They were battling with powerful lobbies and state machineries that were profiting enormously from the enslavement of peoples, as well as with general public opinion, which was indifferent at best. But slowly, the abolitionist movement grew. As its leaders gained popularity, the movement drew increased support from various influential circles as the 19th century approached. In 1807, the UK banned the slave trade. 30 years later, it legitimized the practice of slavery itself. In my home country, the US, the practice of slavery was abolished in 1863 in the midst of a brutal civil war, a major cause of which was the institution of slavery itself. It was only a matter of time before slavery was outlawed everywhere, with Mauritania being the last place on earth to declare the trade illegal in 2007. When the abolitionist movement started, many onlookers, while supporting the cause, believed that opposing slavery was nothing more than tilting at windmills. Nonetheless, the perseverance and the sacrifice of abolitionists in time brought about the shift in public support for slavery, which eventually sounded its death knell. William Wilberforce, a prominent Anglican layman who had become an icon of the abolitionist movement, once said, "You might choose to look the other way, but you can never again say that you did not know." Pope Leo XIII brought the Catholic Church into the same struggle when he wrote the following in the encyclical In Plurimis in 1888. The translation uses a little bit of phraseology that we would find a little bit antiquated, but the essence is there. In the presence of so much suffering, the condition of slavery, in which a considerable part of the great human family has been sunk in squalor and affliction now for many centuries, is deeply to be deplored. This system is one which is wholly opposed to that which was originally ordained by God and by nature. The supreme author of all things so decreed that man should exercise a sort of royal dominion over beasts and cattle and fish and fowl, but never that men should exercise a like dominion over their fellow men. As St. Augustine puts it, having created man a reasonable being, and after his own likeness, God wished that he should rule only over creation, that he should be the master not of men, however, but of beasts. From this it follows that the state of slavery is rightly regarded as a penalty upon the sinner. It is sin, therefore, rightly deserving this name. It is not natural. We can learn something useful and important from the history of the abolition of slavery. As slavery was a source of enormous wealth for amoral individuals then, so it is true for human trafficking today. Many people in early modern society did not consider slavery as a burning issue in their time, which may be very much akin to the opinion of many people regarding human trafficking in our days. Finally, like human trafficking today, fighting slavery was considered as a gargantuan and futile task in the 18th and 19th centuries. Still, it took the action of a small yet convinced group of people to rally their contemporaries to bring an end to the slave trade. Today, it is our time to do the same against human trafficking, and future generations will judge us on how we sought to end this form of modern slavery. For a long time, the Church did not play a significant role in the fight against slavery. Despite the collective pride that may be felt for such stalwart Catholic champions of anti-slavery, such as Cardinal Charles Daniel Balvo, founder of the Missionaries of Africa, and St. Daniel Comboni, founder of the Comboni Missionaries of the Sacred Heart, we also know that there were Catholics before and during their lifetimes who were proponents of slavery. In the past,